Could Meghan Markle have secretly recorded the royal family? That's the question no one expected to hear, not in the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace, not in private rooms where tradition and discretion reign, and certainly not from the lips of Prince William himself. And yet, here we are. According to sources close to the palace, William has dropped a bombshell claim. Meghan allegedly used hidden devices to capture private conversations, not just in passing, but during intimate family moments and official royal meetings. The mere idea is enough to make any loyal royal watcher's stomach twist. Trust, loyalty, secrecy, everything the monarchy relies on, suddenly feels fragile, vulnerable, and exposed. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine this: you're in a room, speaking freely with your closest family members, perhaps even laughing over a shared joke or discussing deeply personal matters. Now imagine discovering later that those moments were recorded without your knowledge. Every sigh, every word, every subtle inflection captured and stored. For most of us, the thought is horrifying, but for the royal family, whose lives are already under constant public scrutiny, the implications are far more severe. Privacy is their currency, their shield, their unspoken code. And now, according to William, that shield has been pierced. The first whispers of this scandal didn't make headlines immediately. There were rumors, murmurs in the corridors, quiet conversations over tea and scones, but in the palace, whispers spread faster than wildfire, and soon, the idea of secret recordings could no longer be ignored. William, known for his calm demeanor and careful management of public image, reportedly could not keep silent. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding or an overblown rumor. There were signs, there were devices, and there were recorded moments that raised eyebrows and questions no one wanted to ask out loud. What was captured? How long had it been happening? And most importantly, why? Sources suggest that the allegations center on an astonishingly bold claim. Meghan may have employed hidden recording devices during official meetings with key family members, including the Queen herself, senior aides, and possibly even at private events like dinners, charity galas, and intimate family gatherings. Devices could have been concealed in objects that seemed ordinary, perhaps a pen, a brooch, even a seemingly innocent piece of jewelry. In a palace designed for security and discretion, the thought that someone could secretly document private conversations sends a chill down the spine. And for William, it's personal. The stakes are no longer abstract. They are about family, trust, and the integrity of the monarchy. William reportedly took immediate action upon suspecting that his suspicions were real. Meetings were held in hushed tones, security reviews conducted, and legal advisors consulted. It was a delicate balance: protect the family and the institution while avoiding a full-blown public scandal. But the more William dug, the more concerning details emerged. Audio files allegedly surfaced, hinting at private conversations that were never meant to leave the room. Though the contents of these files remain confidential, insiders describe them as deeply personal, some even emotionally charged. The idea that someone could collect such intimate moments without consent, moments of vulnerability, of laughter, of grief, is almost unthinkable. Now, here's the part that makes the story even more shocking. William's decision to speak out wasn't just about the devices themselves. It was about the broader implications. The monarchy operates on trust. Trust between family members, trust between the royals and their aides, and trust between the royals and the public. If one person could manipulate that trust for their own purposes, what did it mean for the future of the institution? What did it mean for the fragile bonds within the family? And how would the public react when they learned that private royal moments might have been secretly recorded? The palace, of course, moves carefully, always aware of how the media could seize on such a story. But as whispers turned into more concrete reports, the narrative began to form. Meghan's actions, if true, would represent a breach not just of privacy but of legal boundaries. UK surveillance and privacy laws are strict, and recording someone without their consent, especially in private spaces, carries serious legal consequences. That's the gravity of William's claims. This isn't a tabloid exaggeration. It's a legal and ethical minefield, and the palace had to confront it before it spiraled further. What makes this revelation so compelling and so shocking is the human element. This isn't just about law or protocol. It's about betrayal within the most intimate circles of a family whose lives are already lived under intense scrutiny. Imagine being confronted with the possibility that a loved one could record your words and actions without permission. The mix of shock, hurt, anger, and disbelief is almost cinematic in its intensity. And for William, that cinematic tension has spilled into reality, creating a story that the public is desperate to understand. Yet, despite the intensity, questions remain. How did Meghan allegedly manage to conceal devices in such a heavily monitored environment? Were palace staff aware, or were they unwitting participants? Did the recordings capture anything that could compromise the family, or were they simply private moments made public in secret? Each unanswered question fuels curiosity, building a tension that keeps the public on edge, wondering what will emerge next. And then there's the psychological aspect. The palace is not just a place of ceremony, it's a place where personal relationships are cultivated and maintained. A breach like this undermines the very foundation of familial trust. What happens when laughter, tears, and personal disclosures can no longer be shared freely? What happens when you question the intentions of someone you once welcomed with open arms? The answers are complicated, messy, and emotionally charged, a perfect storm for intrigue, scandal, and heartbreak. In addition, the media frenzy surrounding these claims cannot be underestimated. William's revelations, though serious, were bound to ignite tabloids, social media, and public debate. Each report, each leaked detail amplifies the tension, creating an environment where every gesture, glance, or statement by Meghan or William is scrutinized. The narrative evolves with each passing day, keeping the audience hooked, speculating, and emotionally invested. This is exactly the kind of high-stakes drama that draws millions of viewers, eager to witness every twist and turn. But amid all the media noise, one fact remains constant. William's claims carry weight. He is not a casual commentator, he is an insider, a witness, and a guardian of the royal institution. His words are taken seriously, not just by the public, but by advisors, legal experts, and palace staff. The gravity of his statement that Meghan allegedly violated privacy laws and betrayed intimate trust cannot be overstated. Every viewer, every reader is left wondering, what exactly did he discover, and how will it reshape the perception of Meghan, the royal family, and the monarchy itself? As we move deeper into this story, it's important to understand the stakes, the people involved, and the potential fallout. We will explore the devices allegedly used, the private moments supposedly captured, and the reactions of those closest to the situation. We'll examine the legal and ethical implications, the palace's response, and the wider public's perception. And along the way, we'll reveal why this scandal is not just about Meghan and William, it's about the delicate balance of power, privacy, and trust that sustains the monarchy. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. A single piece of evidence, one recording, allegedly surfaced that could redefine the entire narrative. The reaction inside the palace was immediate, tense, and unlike anything seen before. And William's next move, according to insiders, was decisive, strategic, and potentially explosive. What he revealed next would shock not just the public, but also members of his own family, leaving questions that might never be fully answered. Could it really be true that someone within the royal household was secretly recording private conversations? The mere suggestion felt like a betrayal so deep it threatened to crack the palace walls themselves. And yet, according to whispers that would later reach Prince William, that is exactly what some insiders began to suspect. It all started quietly, almost imperceptibly. A small comment here, a raised eyebrow there. Footsteps in hallways that didn't seem to belong. Nothing was confirmed, but the tension in the palace was palpable. A low hum of suspicion that no one could ignore. The first reports of secret recordings did not come from the press. They didn't arrive in the form of headlines or leaked audio clips. No, they started inside the walls of Buckingham and Clarence House, murmured over afternoon tea, discussed in hushed tones by aides and secretaries who had long served the royal family. People noticed odd behavior, misplaced objects, casual questions that hinted at prior knowledge of conversations, a sudden interest in moments that had previously been private. At first, it seemed almost paranoid. Could they really believe someone would go so far as to secretly capture their private exchanges? But the unease grew with every passing week, and the whispers became impossible to ignore. William, ever the careful observer, noticed the small cracks forming. The tension wasn't just in the staff, it was in the eyes of the family members themselves. Subtle changes in behavior, the way a glance lingered longer than necessary, the small hesitations before speaking. Everything seemed to point toward a silent, hidden violation. And then came the reports, the allegations. Meghan, allegedly, hidden devices, secret recordings, private conversations captured without consent. The very thought sent a shiver down William's spine. Not because he doubted Meghan's sophistication, he knew she was sharp, but because, if true, this wasn't just cleverness. This was a breach of trust on a level he had never encountered. What's shocking is how the palace initially reacted. The first response was disbelief. Surely, they thought, someone so visible, so scrutinized by the public eye, could not risk such audacity. Could it really happen under their watchful eyes? Could private moments in royal residences, moments meant to be safe, really have been captured and stored somewhere secret? Questions multiplied. Staff members began recounting odd occurrences, meetings that seemed unusually quiet, casual conversations where participants seemed unusually guarded, unexpected interest in the most trivial details. Something was off, and the palace had to face the possibility that it wasn't imagination. It was happening. And the reports weren't consistent. They were scattered, fragmentary, almost contradictory. Some suggested that devices were tiny, hidden in earrings or pens. Others claimed they were disguised as everyday household objects. The palace is notoriously secure, with cameras, alarms, and staff trained in observation. And yet, somehow, the whispers persisted, growing louder, more insistent. William, cautious but determined, began piecing together the puzzle. Could one person have managed to circumvent the layers of security and vigilance, or was this a coordinated effort? The questions were endless, and answers seemed just out of reach. The alleged recordings weren't just about idle gossip. Insiders described them as deeply personal, capturing moments of vulnerability, laughter, and emotion. Imagine the intimacy of a private discussion between family members being secretly recorded, every word stored without consent. It's almost too extreme to believe, but according to those close to William, the evidence suggested more than casual suspicion. There were patterns. There were anomalies in meeting logs and unusual behavior that couldn't be explained by coincidence. Something or someone was paying attention to moments that should have remained private. William reportedly convened meetings with senior aides and advisors to address the mounting unease. The conversations were tense, low-toned, almost conspiratorial. They couldn't go public yet, not without confirmation. They couldn't risk panic or media frenzy before understanding the scope. And yet, even in these private discussions, the word recording began to surface. Staff members shared incidents that, in hindsight, seemed minor at the time. A pen left on a table, an odd glance at a smartphone, the way certain conversations seemed to be remembered with uncanny precision. Each incident alone might be dismissed, but together they painted a worrying picture. For William, the emotional stakes were profound. This wasn't a matter of policy or protocol. This was about family, about trust, about knowing that private words shared in confidence would remain confidential. And suddenly, there was doubt. Could he trust Meghan in the same way? Could he trust that moments meant to be shared only with family would remain that way? The palace, a place built on centuries of tradition, suddenly felt vulnerable, exposed. Every corridor seemed to echo with suspicion, every quiet room a potential trap. And then came a turning point. Reports suggest that William discovered the first concrete piece of evidence, a device that didn't belong, hidden where it should never have been. The revelation reportedly sent shockwaves through the palace, not just the presence of the device, but the implications. If one recording existed, how many others might there be? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, who had been captured in these secret moments, unknowingly sharing words that were now no longer private? The palace began reviewing its security protocols with a new urgency. Aides retraced steps, examined rooms, checked objects. The atmosphere was tense, almost cinematic in its intensity. Imagine the corridors of Buckingham, quiet as ever, but filled with a silent fear. Staff and family members alike became hyper-aware, watching each other with suspicion, questioning even the most routine interactions. Every meeting, every conversation felt potentially compromised. The trust that binds a family together had been shaken, and William understood that he needed to act, not rashly, but decisively. And yet, even with the discovery of a device, questions remained. Was Meghan acting alone, or were others involved? Were the recordings intended for personal use, or were they meant to influence, manipulate, or even harm? The answers were elusive, and each new lead seemed to generate more questions than solutions. William found himself navigating a maze of uncertainty, balancing familial loyalty with the responsibility of protecting the monarchy. Amid all of this, the public remained oblivious. Outside the gilded gates, life went on. The headlines didn't reflect the tension inside the palace. The parties, the charity events, the public appearances, all seemed normal, and yet, beneath the polished surface, a storm was brewing. Each whispered suspicion, each discovery of a device, Each question left unanswered was a spark threatening to ignite a full-blown scandal. The alleged recordings also introduced a new layer of complexity. What about the content itself? Could it contain personal disclosures, strategic discussions, or even sensitive information about the monarchy's operations? If true, the potential ramifications were enormous. Every word captured, every nuance preserved, could change the dynamics within the family, between aides, and with the public. And for William, the emotional weight was unbearable. He had to protect the institution, but he also had to confront the possibility that someone he trusted had betrayed that trust in the most intimate way possible. Questions multiplied. Could he confront Meghan directly? Should he involve legal counsel immediately, or try to contain the issue privately first? Who could he trust in this situation? And above all, what would the world think if this story ever became public? William reportedly spent sleepless nights weighing these questions, knowing that any misstep could have profound consequences for the family and the monarchy. The palace, steeped in centuries of tradition and secrecy, was now a crucible of tension. The first allegations had surfaced, and the reverberations were only beginning to be felt. The walls that once protected the private lives of the royals now seemed permeable. The trust that held them together felt precarious. And in the middle of it all, William was left with a choice: act decisively and risk exposure, or wait and risk betrayal continuing unseen. But what happened next would escalate the situation beyond whispers and suspicions. A second device allegedly came to light, this one hidden in a place no one could have imagined. Its discovery, according to insiders, shocked even William, leaving him questioning everything he thought he knew about trust, loyalty, and the boundaries of privacy within the royal household. The stage was set, the stakes higher than ever, and the story was only beginning to unfold. Could someone really hide a recording device in a place no one would suspect? The question alone is enough to make even the most seasoned palace staff shiver. Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, and Windsor Castle are designed for security and surveillance. Every room, hallway, and entrance is monitored, every visitor logged. The idea that a device could slip past that level of scrutiny, that someone could secretly capture private conversations without a trace, seems almost impossible. And yet, according to insiders, that is exactly what Prince William came to believe. It began with the first discovery, a small, unassuming object, almost laughably ordinary at first glance. Perhaps it was a pen, a brooch, or a tiny piece of tech that looked like a common household item. But the implications were far from ordinary. This device wasn't decorative or functional in the traditional sense. It was designed to record, to capture private moments, to listen and store conversations without anyone's knowledge. The palace, known for its meticulous protocols, suddenly faced an unprecedented vulnerability. William reportedly studied the device himself, trying to comprehend how it could have gone unnoticed. Its size, design, and placement were deliberate. It was concealed with ingenuity that made it almost invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. Staff who later examined it were astonished at the subtlety. It's not just a recording device, one aide reportedly said. It's a work of engineering designed to bypass human oversight entirely. The realization sent a ripple of fear and anger through the palace. And yet, for William, it wasn't just about technology. It was about intent. Whoever placed the device had a purpose. They weren't merely curious. They were gathering, collecting, and possibly strategizing. The potential breach wasn't abstract. It was intimate, personal, and deeply unsettling. Conversations meant to be private between family members or advisors could now be heard, remembered, and possibly used in ways no one could anticipate. But it didn't stop with one device. As security teams and aides combed through the palaces, more anomalies surfaced. Objects that had always been part of the furniture, the decor, or even personal belongings began to be scrutinized. A pen on a side table. A small recording device hidden in a seemingly ordinary brooch. Even the possibility of digital devices, smartphones, tablets, or wearables, being repurposed for clandestine recording became a concern. The scope of the surveillance potential was staggering. How could someone operate with such precision in a place so secure? Part of the explanation lies in the insider knowledge Meghan reportedly had. Familiarity with royal routines, the placement of security cameras, and the habits of staff could allow for a level of stealth that would be nearly impossible for an outsider. Devices could be placed in ways that avoided routine inspections, in locations where staff rarely looked, in items that seemed perfectly ordinary. Every corner, every table, every decorative object became a potential listening post. And the implications didn't just frighten staff, they disturbed William personally. For him, the idea that private conversations could be captured in such a way felt like a betrayal, not just of protocol, but of trust. Family discussions, strategic planning, moments of vulnerability, all potentially recorded without consent. It wasn't just about the technology. It was about the person behind it, the deliberate choice to eavesdrop, to breach the sanctuary that the family believed they had. Insiders have described William's reaction as measured but intense. He didn't explode in anger. He assessed, investigated, and strategized. Every device discovered was logged, examined, and removed, but the emotional impact lingered. Each new find reinforced the fear that private moments, laughter, arguments, and decisions had potentially been captured. The palace, built on centuries of trust and decorum, suddenly felt fragile, exposed, and vulnerable in ways it never had before. The potential scale of these devices also raised questions about legality. UK surveillance laws are strict. Recording someone without consent is not just a breach of trust, it's a criminal offense. If these devices had been used during meetings or private family moments, they weren't merely ethical violations, they were legal ones. And that added another layer of tension. Any action taken, any discovery made, had to be balanced against legal repercussions and the potential for public exposure. And then came the irony. In a palace designed for scrutiny and surveillance, the devices themselves went undetected for months. Staff who were trained to notice anomalies, who routinely monitored the halls and rooms, had no idea the devices were there. How could something so small have such a big impact? The answer, insiders say, lies in the combination of sophisticated technology and insider knowledge. Someone who knew the routines, the blind spots, and the habits of those around them could deploy these devices with uncanny precision. William reportedly began creating an internal map of potential vulnerabilities: rooms where private conversations occurred, corridors used for confidential discussions, areas where aides met with family members. Each became a focus for investigation. Devices were removed, staff interviewed, and routines adjusted. But even with these precautions, the emotional weight remained. The realization that moments meant to be private could have been captured and possibly stored somewhere was almost unbearable. And the devices weren't always obvious. Some were disguised in ordinary objects like pens, clocks, or even decorative ornaments. Others were more sophisticated, capable of transmitting audio or video to remote storage locations. Every discovery raised more questions than answers. How long had they been in place? How many conversations had been recorded? And most importantly, what was the purpose? Was it personal curiosity, strategic leverage? And then came the irony. In a palace designed for scrutiny and surveillance, the devices themselves went undetected for months. Staff who were trained to notice anomalies, who routinely monitored the halls and rooms, had no idea the devices were there. How could something so small have such a big impact? The answer, insiders say, lies in the combination of sophisticated technology and insider knowledge. Someone who knew the routines, the blind spots, and the habits of those around them could deploy these devices with uncanny precision. William reportedly began creating an internal map of potential vulnerabilities: rooms where private conversations occurred, corridors used for confidential discussions, areas where aides met with family members. Each became a focus for investigation. Devices were removed, staff interviewed, and routines adjusted. But even with these precautions, the emotional weight remained. The realization that moments meant to be private could have been captured and possibly stored somewhere was almost unbearable. And the devices weren't always obvious. Some were disguised in ordinary objects like pens, clocks, or even decorative ornaments. Others were more sophisticated, capable of transmitting audio or video to remote storage locations. Every discovery raised more questions than answers. How long had they been in place? How many conversations had been recorded? And most importantly, what was the purpose? Was it personal curiosity, strategic leverage, or something more sinister? For William, the stakes were not just technological. They were profoundly personal. Family dynamics, trust, and loyalty were suddenly under a microscope, as if the palace itself had become a testing ground for privacy violations. Every interaction, every conversation, every decision felt potentially compromised. And yet, action had to be measured. React too strongly, and the story might leak to the public, sparking a scandal beyond comprehension. Hesitate, and the risk of further breaches increased. Insiders also revealed that some devices were discovered in locations where private and sensitive matters were discussed. Rooms used for family meetings, charity planning sessions, and even informal gatherings. Each find caused a ripple of concern, not just about the technology itself, but about the human behavior behind it. Who had placed them, and why? The answers remained elusive, but the implications were clear. Privacy had been violated in ways that could never be fully undone. And just when it seemed that the devices had been accounted for, one final discovery reportedly sent shockwaves through the palace. A device found in a location considered entirely secure, one that had never been suspected, suggested a level of planning and foresight that was almost impossible to anticipate. William reportedly reacted with a mixture of disbelief and resolve. If someone could hide a device in such a place, what else might have been captured? How deep did this really go? The palace now faced a delicate balancing act: maintain the security of the institution, address the legal implications, and protect the emotional well-being of the family. Every decision, every step forward had consequences. Every conversation about the devices had to be handled with extreme care. And yet, the suspense remained. What had these devices recorded? Who had been caught in private moments, unaware that their words were being captured? And how would the palace and the public respond once the full extent became known? But even as William tightened security and removed the devices, the tension lingered. Questions of intent, scale, and consequence loomed large. Could someone have used these recordings for influence or manipulation? Was it curiosity, ambition, or something darker? The answers, for now, remained hidden, leaving the palace and the public in suspense. And then came the twist that no one expected. According to insiders, one of the devices wasn't just a simple recorder. It had allegedly captured a conversation that could change everything. The content of this recording, the context, and the implications reportedly left William stunned, forcing him to reconsider what he thought he knew about trust, loyalty, and betrayal within his own family. The discovery set the stage for a conflict that would ripple through the palace for months to come. And as the story began to leak into whispers and speculation, the public's curiosity ignited. Everyone wanted to know what had been recorded, who was implicated, and perhaps most importantly, how would William handle the revelation that someone close to him might have crossed the line of trust in the most intimate of ways? But what came next would take the story beyond hidden devices and secret recordings. There was more at stake than technology. It was about consequences, legal ramifications, and the emotional fallout that could alter the course of the royal family forever. What if the moments you believed were private, conversations meant for the walls of your home, whispers shared in confidence, were being listened to, recorded, and possibly stored somewhere else? That is the question Prince William reportedly began grappling with as the alleged recording surfaced. And for the royal family, whose every public gesture is already scrutinized, the idea that private words could be captured without consent was devastating. Insiders describe a tense atmosphere in the palace as William reviewed the situation. Every private conversation, from casual family dinners to strategic meetings with advisors, suddenly became suspect. How many of those moments, he wondered, had been recorded, and more importantly, who had access to them? The thought alone was enough to create sleepless nights. Imagine sitting at a family dinner, sharing a laugh, or discussing personal struggles, only to later question whether your words had been stored somewhere, ready to be listened to again and again. The nature of these alleged recordings is key to understanding their impact. According to sources, the devices weren't just capturing ambient sound, they were strat. The ethical stakes were equally high. There is an unspoken code within the royal family: confidentiality, trust, and respect for private moments. Allegedly recording family members, advisors, or aides without consent would violate this code. Even if the recordings were never intended for public release, the act itself constitutes a profound breach of personal and professional ethics. William, sources suggest, struggled with how to reconcile the ethical violation with the legal consequences. Was this a personal betrayal, a tactical error, or something more calculated? Adding to the complexity was the question of intent. In the eyes of the law, motive can sometimes influence judgment. Was the alleged recording done to gather information for personal gain, to manipulate, or to simply satisfy curiosity? Each scenario carries different implications, both legally and ethically. William reportedly debated whether proving intent would be easier than proving the act itself, and whether intent could even be discerned after the fact. The uncertainty only heightened the tension. Legal counsel also reportedly warned about the domino effect. Once one recording was discovered, it could imply the existence of more: multiple devices, multiple conversations, multiple potential violations. Each discovery exponentially increased the risk, raising questions about past events, ongoing meetings, and even international discussions. The palace, steeped in protocol and discretion, suddenly had to contend with a potentially massive legal minefield. And then there was public perception. The media thrives on scandal, and allegations involving unauthorized recordings within the royal household are a journalist's dream. William reportedly understood that even a minor legal misstep could become a global headline. Misinterpreted evidence, leaked details, or even speculation could spiral into a crisis. Legal advisors reportedly stressed extreme caution, act too quickly, and the palace risks exposure, act too slowly, and the breach continues. Every step had to be calculated. Meanwhile, ethical dilemmas weighed heavily on William. Beyond legality, there was the human cost. Trust within the family had been damaged. Conversations that were once candid were now suspect. Relationships strained, alliances tested, and the emotional toll became almost unbearable. For a family whose cohesion is central to the institution's stability, these breaches were more than procedural. They were personal. Insiders described William's internal debate as profound. He needed to act decisively, but he also needed to protect the family from public humiliation. He reportedly considered multiple scenarios, confronting the individual privately, documenting the evidence discreetly, or involving law enforcement in a controlled way. Each choice carried risk, and none were without consequences. The decision-making process, sources say, was agonizing. The legal complexity was further compounded by the nature of the evidence. Devices, recordings, and their contents had to be authenticated. Were the devices tampered with? Could the recordings be misinterpreted? How would the law interpret intent versus accident? These questions multiplied daily, keeping William and his advisors on high alert. Even with substantial evidence, the legal landscape was fraught with uncertainty. And yet, there was an urgency that could not be ignored. If the devices had captured sensitive or strategic conversations, there was a possibility of misuse. Could information be leaked to the press, manipulated for financial gain, or exploited for political influence? The potential for harm went beyond the palace walls and into the broader public sphere. William reportedly felt the weight of responsibility keenly. Protecting privacy wasn't just about law. It was about safeguarding the monarchy and the public's trust. Ethically, the situation was no less thorny. Allegedly recording family members without consent is a profound violation of personal boundaries. William reportedly reflected on the irony. The palace is a place of public scrutiny, yet it has always relied on private moments to maintain trust, unity, and morale. The recordings, whether intentional or not, shattered that equilibrium. Conversations that once offered comfort or strategic insight could now be weaponized, taken out of context, or misunderstood. The ethical implications were as urgent as the legal ones. William also reportedly faced a dilemma about disclosure. Should the situation remain confidential, handled strictly within the palace, or should the public be informed once the severity was clear? Too much secrecy could breed rumors, speculation, and mistrust. Too much disclosure could damage reputations and exacerbate legal consequences. The balance between transparency and protection was razor thin. Insiders hint that this legal and ethical labyrinth caused a ripple effect in how the family interacted. Meetings became shorter, discussions more guarded. Staff members, once accustomed to candid conversations, now tiptoed around certain topics. Every interaction carried a silent question. Could this moment have been recorded? The psychological impact was palpable, and William reportedly felt the pressure of not just resolving the issue, but maintaining the family's cohesion and dignity in the process. The potential legal ramifications were also international in scope. The royal family often interacts with foreign dignitaries, diplomats, and officials. Alleged unauthorized recordings, if exposed, could create diplomatic tensions or be interpreted as breaches of confidentiality in sensitive matters. Every recorded conversation, no matter how seemingly mundane, carried a risk of far-reaching consequences. William's task, therefore, wasn't just domestic, it was global in its implications. And as if that weren't enough, one critical question lingered. Had any of the recordings already been shared? Could content have been copied, leaked, or stored beyond palace control? Each scenario presented a new ethical and legal challenge. Every advisor, aide, and family member faced the tension of uncertainty, unsure what had been captured and how it might be used. Then came the tipping point. Insiders suggest that one particularly sensitive conversation, captured without consent, forced William to act decisively. The content reportedly touched on issues that went beyond personal family matters. implicating advisors, protocols, and potentially even public perception. The gravity of the situation meant that private deliberation was no longer enough. The palace needed a strategy, a plan, and a path forward that balanced legality, ethics, and emotional consequences. William's advisors reportedly debated the possible courses of action late into the night. Legal recourse, private confrontation, internal investigations, all were considered, but each had risks. Misstep on any front could escalate into a public scandal. Delay could mean further violations or misuse of content. And for William personally, the emotional toll was mounting. He was balancing the role of family protector, institutional guardian, and public figure simultaneously. But what came next would complicate matters even further. A device allegedly captured a conversation not just about family matters, but about strategy, decision-making, and trust. The content reportedly had implications William never anticipated, forcing him to reconsider his approach entirely. The stakes were higher than ever, and the choices he made next could determine not just the fate of the individual involved, but the stability of the monarchy itself. What happens when whispers turn into accusations? When suspicion becomes reality? For Buckingham Palace, the discovery of alleged recording devices didn't just spark concern, it ignited a storm behind closed doors. The tension, according to insiders, was palpable, a kind of heavy silence that settled over corridors where laughter and protocol usually prevailed. Every glance, every gesture, every word carried a new weight. The palace was no longer just a center of ceremony, it had become a crucible of fear, suspicion, and uncertainty. Immediately after the discovery of the first devices, senior aides reportedly convened emergency meetings. The rooms where they gathered, normally spaces for planning and consultation, became arenas for whispered debate. Security protocols were reviewed in minute detail. Every object, from pens to clocks, was scrutinized. And yet, despite these measures, an air of unease persisted. Staff began to notice changes in behavior. Colleagues who once spoke freely became cautious, polite laughter now carried an edge of tension, and every private discussion seemed shadowed by doubt. William, according to insiders, was at the center of these meetings, calm yet visibly tense. He understood the stakes. If the situation escalated publicly, it could become a scandal of historic proportions. And yet, he also knew that the palace had to act internally, decisively, to protect both the institution and the family. The challenge was immense. Every step forward required careful judgment, balancing legal implications, ethical considerations, and the emotional impact on those involved. One of the most immediate reactions reportedly came from palace aides and staff. Loyal, dedicated, and often long-serving, they had never imagined that the very conversations they helped facilitate could have been secretly recorded. Shock quickly gave way to fear and frustration. Could they trust each other? Could they trust the family members they served? Every routine interaction became a potential trap, every meeting a test of vigilance. According to sources, some aides began double-checking rooms and personal belongings before meetings, a behavior previously unthinkable. Meanwhile, within the family itself, the atmosphere reportedly shifted dramatically. Conversations once casual and candid became measured and deliberate. Members who had previously felt free to discuss personal or sensitive matters in confidence now paused, hesitated, and weighed their words. William reportedly noticed the subtle changes, the way a brother or sister would glance nervously before speaking, the careful phrasing of a sentence, the sudden avoidance of certain topics. Trust, once assumed, had been compromised. Insiders describe private confrontations taking place as well. In closed-door discussions, William is said to have addressed the alleged recordings directly, emphasizing both the legal and ethical implications. The tone, according to sources, was firm but not accusatory, an attempt to balance authority with the need to maintain familial cohesion. Yet the gravity of the situation was impossible to ignore. The palace had to acknowledge the breach, identify the extent of the recordings, and implement measures to prevent further violations. What made the reaction so intense was the dual nature of the threat. On one hand, there was the immediate concern of privacy and trust. On the other hand, there was the looming possibility that the content of the recordings could be misused, leaked, or taken out of context. This wasn't just a matter of stolen words. It was a potential weapon capable of influencing public perception, media narratives, and internal family dynamics. The tension was psychological, emotional, and operational, all at once. A particularly sensitive point reportedly emerged regarding the legal implications of the devices. Even if no recordings had yet been leaked, the act of recording alone could constitute a violation of UK privacy and surveillance laws. This added an element of urgency to the internal response. Advisors and legal counsel reportedly debated whether to handle the matter entirely internally or involve law enforcement in a controlled, discreet way. Every decision carried consequences, and the pressure was immense. The reactions behind closed doors weren't limited to strategy and protocol. Emotional responses played a significant role. Staff reportedly felt betrayed, some confused, others angry. Family members, caught between personal loyalty and the need to protect the institution, experienced shock, disbelief, and frustration. According to sources, some conversations devolved into heated exchanges, with questions of trust and betrayal dominating the dialogue. The palace, usually a place of careful decorum, had transformed into a place of intense emotional scrutiny. Even subtle behaviors were affected. Meetings became more structured, with agendas strictly adhered to. Casual discussions, informal asides, and spontaneous planning were reduced or eliminated. Security protocols were heightened. Staff began checking and rechecking rooms, devices, and personal belongings, a reflection not just of concern but of fear. Every action, every word carried the shadow of potential scrutiny, a direct consequence of the alleged recordings. Yet, there was also an undercurrent of resolve. William reportedly emphasized that while the breach was serious, the family and the palace could recover if handled correctly. The goal was to reestablish trust, secure the institution, and address the ethical and legal dimensions responsibly. According to insiders, this approach required both firmness and patience, a recognition that while anger and frustration were natural, rash action could worsen the situation. The alleged recordings also introduced a ripple effect in relationships with aides, advisors, and staff. Whispers of suspicion spread beyond the initial circle. Staff members reportedly began questioning each other, wondering if devices had been moved, discovered, or tampered with. The psychological impact was significant. Everyone felt under a new kind of scrutiny, and interactions became cautious, measured, and calculated. Trust, which had once been assumed, now had to be earned, moment by moment. And then came another turning point. A device was reportedly discovered in a location considered entirely secure, one that until that moment was assumed invulnerable. The discovery reportedly stunned William and the senior staff. It suggested a level of foresight and planning that was both sophisticated and troubling. If one device could be placed in such a location, what else might exist? How deep did this alleged surveillance really go? The palace, sources suggest, realized that the situation was far more serious than initially believed. The emotional stakes were compounded by the potential for public exposure. The royal family, constantly under media scrutiny, faced the risk that even minor leaks could be sensationalized. Legal experts warned that public perception could exacerbate the consequences of the breach. William reportedly spent hours deliberating how to manage both internal response and external communication, recognizing that missteps could create a narrative beyond anyone's control. Insiders also emphasized the moral and ethical dimension. This wasn't just about law or security, it was about relationships, trust, and the emotional bonds that hold a family together. Allegedly recording private conversations, moments of laughter, frustration, or vulnerability represented a fundamental betrayal. William reportedly struggled with the dual responsibilities of protecting the family's integrity and maintaining individual trust. Each choice carried weight, and every decision had the potential to create lasting consequences. But even as the palace reacted, the questions multiplied. How many conversations had been captured? How long had the devices been in place? Were any recordings already copied or transmitted? What would happen if the public learned the details? These questions, sources suggest, fueled a sense of urgency and tension that permeated the palace. Staff, family members, and advisors were all on high alert, navigating a delicate balance between secrecy, responsibility, and emotional vulnerability. And then, just when it seemed the immediate response might stabilize the situation, a report surfaced that changed everything. One of the devices allegedly captured a conversation that, if revealed, could shift perceptions, implicate individuals, and influence decisions in ways no one expected. The content reportedly forced William to confront not only the scale of the breach, but also its potential consequences for the family, the institution, and the monarchy as a whole. The palace, insiders say, recognized that this was no longer simply a matter of removing devices or tightening security. The alleged recordings represented a profound ethical and legal challenge, one that required careful deliberation, emotional intelligence, and strategic foresight. Every decision from that point forward would have ramifications, some immediate, others long-lasting. But what came next would push the palace into uncharted territory. A recording surfaced that allegedly captured a conversation so sensitive, so private, that it threatened to expose internal dynamics in ways no one could have anticipated. William now faced a dilemma unlike any he had encountered before: how to address the breach, protect the family, and navigate the legal and ethical minefield, all while managing the growing potential for public scandal. What happens when secrets that were meant to stay behind closed doors suddenly escape into the public sphere? For Buckingham Palace, the answer was chaos. Despite every effort to control the narrative internally, whispers of secret recordings and hidden devices began to leak, igniting speculation, rumor, and eventually, media frenzy. The very thing William feared most, public exposure, was now becoming a reality. It started slowly. Journalists noticed subtle inconsistencies, insider chatter, and hints of tension in royal appearances. A source might mention that a private conversation seemed unusually well-informed. A staff member, perhaps unintentionally, let slip a detail about security being tightened. At first, these fragments were dismissed as rumor, but as more incidents surfaced, reporters began connecting dots, crafting narratives, and seeking confirmation. The palace, once confident in its internal control, realized that the story was out there, growing in ways that could no longer be contained. William reportedly watched the initial media attention with a mixture of concern and frustration. On one hand, he understood that leaks were inevitable. Palace staff, aides, and even family members interact with the world beyond the gates. On the other, the implications of public speculation were serious. Every insinuation about secret recordings, every hint of betrayal could be misinterpreted, sensationalized, or distorted to fit a story. The potential for reputational damage was enormous. Journalists quickly pounced. Headlines appeared, some measured, others sensational. Royal family recordings. Meghan Markle allegedly spies on palace conversations. Read one. Hidden devices in Buckingham. Privacy breach alleged. Read another. Social media amplified the speculation, with commentators, royal watchers, and influencers dissecting every public gesture, every glance, and every past interaction for signs that the rumors were true. The palace, which had managed to maintain discretion for decades, suddenly faced a global audience ready to scrutinize every detail. Insiders suggest that the leaks themselves may have originated from multiple sources. Some point to staff members who were concerned, curious, or frustrated. Others hint at aides who felt the urgency to warn the public indirectly. And then there were the whispers from family members themselves, subtle comments in public appearances, offhand remarks at charity events, or statements that were quickly analyzed and interpreted by the press. The result was a growing storm that no one inside the palace could fully control. William reportedly moved quickly to assess the damage and contain the fallout. Legal advisors, public relations teams, and senior aides were brought together to determine the best course of action. The goal was to protect the family, secure the palace's reputation, and manage the story before it spiraled further out of control. But even with rapid response, the challenge was immense. The leaks had already set the narrative, and public perception is notoriously difficult to manage once speculation begins. At the same time, emotional tension inside the palace intensified. Family members reportedly reacted with shock, anger, and frustration. Conversations that had been private were now fodder for public discussion. Staff members who had previously felt secure were suddenly navigating an environment where trust was fragile and scrutiny constant. The palace, once a fortress of discretion, was now operating in the eye of a media storm, forced to balance internal stability with external pressure. One particularly concerning aspect of the leaks, according to insiders, was the selective nature of the information reaching the press. Not all recordings or devices were revealed, and not all details were accurate. This selective exposure fueled further speculation and created a narrative that may have exaggerated the situation. William reportedly had to contend not only with the reality of the leaks, but with the distorted perception of events being presented to the public. The palace also had to address the potential legal ramifications of media exposure. Even if recordings had been removed and devices neutralized, the fact that details had reached journalists opened the door to questions about defamation, privacy violations, and reputational harm. William reportedly consulted with legal experts on how to respond publicly without compromising ongoing investigations or creating additional liability. Every statement, every denial, every acknowledgement had to be carefully calibrated. And yet, the leaks continued to generate new layers of intrigue. Social media platforms amplified rumors, with clips, memes, and analysis spreading rapidly. Every comment from royal insiders was scrutinized, every public appearance dissected for hidden meaning. The palace, according to sources, faced an unprecedented challenge, managing an information ecosystem that was largely out of its control. The tension inside the walls mirrored the frenzy outside, creating a perfect storm of anxiety, suspicion, and urgency. William's personal response, insiders say, combined frustration with determination. He reportedly emphasized to aides and family members that containment was key. The narrative could not be allowed to spiral completely. At the same time, he recognized that the story, once in the public domain, would be interpreted in countless ways, some accurate, some distorted, and some dangerously misleading. The need for both strategic communication and careful internal management was paramount. Another complication reportedly emerged when it became clear that some of the leaks included mischaracterizations. Certain details, taken out of context, amplified public misunderstanding. For example, a comment made during a private family discussion could be twisted into evidence of manipulation or ill intent. Insiders suggest that William had to walk a fine line, defend the family's reputation without inadvertently drawing attention to unverified claims or making the situation worse. At the same time, the leaks prompted renewed internal investigation. Every device, every recording, every possible breach was reviewed again. Security protocols were reevaluated, staff were questioned discreetly to assess whether any other devices had been missed or whether more sensitive material could have been compromised. The palace reportedly treated the situation with an intensity likened to a national security concern, reflecting the gravity of the alleged recordings and the potential for misuse. Yet even amidst this frenzy, William reportedly remained focused on the human dimension. He understood that beyond legal, technical, and reputational issues, the leaks had a profound emotional impact. Family members who felt betrayed were now navigating public exposure on top of personal grief and frustration. Staff who had worked loyally for decades faced a new level of scrutiny and stress. Every interaction was now colored by suspicion, making routine operations emotionally charged and politically delicate. And then came the next shock. A piece of evidence allegedly reached a journalist in a form that was nearly impossible to ignore. It wasn't a complete recording, but a fragment that hinted at deeper implications. Conversations that could challenge perceptions of loyalty, influence, and trust within the family. The fragment reportedly spread quickly, fueling media speculation and creating pressure for William to respond publicly or risk losing control over the narrative entirely. This development reportedly forced William and senior advisors into intense deliberations. Should they confirm the existence of the recordings? Should they deny them outright? Or should they take a cautious approach, handling the matter internally while monitoring media coverage? Each option carried risks, both for the institution and for personal relationships. Misjudgment, insiders suggest, could escalate the situation beyond containment. Meanwhile, the emotional weight continued to grow. Staff and family members reportedly felt a mix of anxiety, frustration, and betrayal. Public curiosity magnified these feelings, creating a feedback loop of tension and speculation. Every reported detail from the press, even if inaccurate, reinforced the perception that privacy had been violated in ways that could not easily be undone. The palace faced another dilemma. The more attention the leaks received, the more pressure mounted on William to act decisively. Yet any hasty action risked exposing additional information or escalating public scrutiny. According to insiders, this delicate balance required constant vigilance, emotional intelligence, and strategic foresight. William had to navigate a minefield where legal, ethical, and emotional stakes were intertwined in ways that few outside the palace could fully comprehend. And then, just when the situation seemed at a tipping point, an even more troubling revelation emerged. One of the leaked fragments, insiders claim, contained information that went beyond personal matters, hinting at strategic discussions within the palace. The content, incomplete yet suggestive, reportedly raised questions about decision-making, influence, and loyalty. For William, the stakes were now higher than ever. The leaks were no longer just embarrassing, they were potentially destabilizing. But what came next would push the situation from internal concern to international attention. The story, fueled by curiosity, speculation, and selective evidence, was about to reach a level that would test the royal family, the palace staff, and William himself in ways no one had anticipated. The public was watching, the press was relentless, and the palace was navigating a storm with no clear end in sight. What if everything you thought you knew about a situation was suddenly questioned? For Meghan Markle, the alleged secret recordings became more than a story. They became a test of narrative, loyalty, and public perception. William's revelations, the leaks, the devices, the media frenzy, they all painted a picture that was explosive, shocking, and deeply personal. But insiders suggest that Meghan's side of the story, her perspective, was just as critical to understanding the full scope of events. According to sources, Meghan reportedly approached the situation with a combination of denial, deflection, and strategic framing. She allegedly rejected any notion that she had intentionally violated privacy or placed the family at risk. At the same time, she reportedly emphasized her right to protect herself, her own privacy, and her interests. It was a delicate balancing act, responding without inflaming public perception, defending against accusations without providing more fuel for the media, and maintaining her own sense of agency amidst a storm controlled largely by others. Insiders describe her demeanor as calm but assertive. She reportedly insisted that any devices or recordings were either misunderstandings, misinterpretations, or exaggerations. According to some accounts, she questioned the validity of the devices themselves, suggesting that they might have been planted, misidentified, or overinterpreted by those who discovered them. Whether true or not, the effect was significant. It introduced doubt, created alternative narratives, and complicated the palace's efforts to manage the situation. At the same time, Meghan reportedly framed herself as a target of scrutiny unfairly. She allegedly highlighted the intense pressure and public attention she faced, suggesting that accusations of secret recordings were part of a broader campaign to undermine her credibility. Whether this perspective was motivated by personal defense, strategic positioning, or genuine concern, it reportedly shifted the tone of internal discussions. Staff and advisors had to consider not only the technical and legal implications of the alleged recordings, but also the interpersonal dynamics and emotional fallout. William, sources say, listened closely to Meghan's explanations. He reportedly weighed her words against the evidence, the devices found, and the leaks that had emerged. The juxtaposition of allegation and denial created a tension that insiders describe as almost unbearable. Every claim had to be assessed: what was factual, what was exaggerated, and what was purely narrative control. The process, reportedly, was painstaking, meticulous, and emotionally draining. Directly confronting her, William Alec, the ethical stakes were equally high. There is an unspoken code within the royal family: confidentiality, trust, and respect for private moments. Allegedly recording family members, advisors, or aides without consent would violate this code, even if the recordings were never intended for public release. The act itself constitutes a profound breach of personal and professional ethics. William, sources suggest, struggled with how to reconcile the ethical violation with the legal consequences. Was this a personal betrayal, a tactical error, or something more calculated? Adding to the complexity was the question of intent. In the eyes of the law, motive can sometimes influence judgment. Was the alleged recording done to gather information for personal gain, to manipulate, or to simply satisfy curiosity? Each scenario carries different implications, both legally and ethically. William reportedly debated whether proving intent would be easier than proving the act itself, and whether intent could even be discerned after the fact. The uncertainty only heightened the tension. Legal counsel also reportedly warned about the domino effect. Once one recording was discovered, it could imply the existence of more: multiple devices, multiple conversations, multiple potential violations. Each discovery exponentially increased the risk, raising questions about past events, ongoing meetings, and even international discussions. The palace, steeped in protocol and discretion, suddenly had to contend with a potentially massive legal minefield. And then there was public perception. The media thrives on scandal, and allegations involving unauthorized recordings within the royal household are a journalist's dream. William reportedly understood that even a minor legal misstep could become a global headline. Misinterpreted evidence, leaked details, or even speculation could spiral into a crisis. Legal advisors reportedly stressed extreme caution: act too quickly. And the palace risks exposure: act too slowly. And the breach continues. Every step had to be calculated. Meanwhile, ethical dilemmas weighed heavily on William. Beyond legality, there was the human cost. Trust within the family had been damaged. Conversations that were once candid were now suspect. Relationships strained, alliances tested, and the emotional toll became almost unbearable. For a family whose cohesion is central to the institution's stability, these breaches were more than procedural. They were personal. Insiders described William's internal debate as profound. He needed to act decisively, but he also needed to protect the family from public humiliation. He reportedly considered multiple scenarios: confronting the individual privately, documenting the evidence discreetly, or involving law enforcement in a controlled way. Each choice carried risk, and none were without consequences. The decision-making process, sources say, was agonizing. The legal complexity was further compounded by the nature of the evidence. Devices, recordings, and their contents had to be authenticated. Were the devices tampered with? Could the recordings be misinterpreted? How would the law interpret intent versus accident? These questions multiplied daily, keeping William and his advisors on high alert. Even with substantial evidence, the legal landscape was fraught with uncertainty. And yet, there was an urgency that could not be ignored. If the devices had captured sensitive or strategic conversations, there was a possibility of misuse. Could information be leaked to the press, manipulated for financial gain, or exploited for political influence? The potential for harm went beyond the palace walls and into the broader public sphere. William reportedly felt the weight of responsibility keenly. Protecting privacy wasn't just about law. It was about safeguarding the monarchy and the public's trust. Ethically, the situation was no less thorny. Allegedly recording family members without consent is a profound violation of personal boundaries. William reportedly reflected on the irony. The palace is a place of public scrutiny, yet it has always relied on private moments to maintain trust, unity, and morale. The recordings, whether intentional or not, shattered that equilibrium. Conversations that once offered comfort or strategic insight could now be weaponized, taken out of context, or misunderstood. The ethical implications were as urgent as the legal ones. William also reportedly faced a dilemma about disclosure. Should the situation remain confidential, handled strictly within the palace, or should the public be informed once the severity was clear? Too much secrecy could breed rumors, speculation, and mistrust. Too much disclosure could damage reputations and exacerbate legal consequences. The balance between transparency and protection was razor thin. Insiders hint that this legal and ethical labyrinth caused a ripple effect in how the family interacted. Meetings became shorter, discussions more guarded. Staff members, once accustomed to candid conversations, now tiptoed around certain topics. Every interaction carried a silent question. Could this moment have been recorded? The psychological impact was palpable, and William reportedly felt the pressure of not just resolving the issue, but maintaining the family's cohesion and dignity in the process. The potential legal ramifications were also international in scope. The royal family often interacts with foreign dignitaries, diplomats, and officials. Alleged unauthorized recordings, if exposed, could create diplomatic tensions or be interpreted as breach